The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. In British Columbia, 9 new windmill projects designed to last 30 years and deliver 5,000 gigawatt hours of electricity annually have been given the green light. The projects are being built in partnership with and on First Nations land. In an effort to speed construction, the province has exempted these projects from environmental assessments. Conservative Party leader John Rustad believes that waiving the assessments of the projects is wrong. People need to have a full understanding of what the impact of these wind projects are on the environment, he said. Windmills are often seen as symbols of clean energy and sustainability, but there is more to the story. Are they as efficient, environmentally friendly, and economically viable as we're led to believe? I invited David Blackmon, an expert in energy and infrastructure, to join me for a conversation that matters about the reality of windmills, their power generation capabilities, and their environmental impact. David, welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So windmills have really got this image of being, yes, a clean, green alternative. But from your perspective, is that an accurate assessment of what windmills are in relationship to their environmental impact?
Well, no, in a word, no. So there, we constantly are given a narrative about the wind industry that makes it appear to be a lot cleaner than it really is. And cleaner, by cleaner, I mean lower emission, less polluting, less impactful on the environment and surrounding wildlife. Typical estimates of wind industry efficiencies are always overstated. They run, they claim they run at 25% efficiency, which means they generate power at 25% of their nameplate capacity. But in reality, you end up getting much less than that. And depending on weather conditions, you quite often get none at all. And the biggest problem, we have in Texas and in some other parts of the world is wind tends to fail at the time you need the generation capacity the most. In Texas a few years ago, we had a major freeze event. Wind was the first generation source that fell off the grid. Just when we needed, some renewable capacity to kick in because part of our natural gas system was freezing up. And so it's not only far more impactful than they claim, it's a lot less reliable than they claim. And I feel bad for the First Nations who are going to be hosting this because I kind of doubt they realize some of the realities of what they're going to be facing.
Well, what are some of those realities? And I want to start by asking, in relationship to a comment is in one of your posts about these kinds of projects that are being undertaken in Scotland and the impact that it's having on millions of trees.
Yeah. They cut down 16 million trees in Scotland to build some wind farms. There in the UK and England, they're about to condemn 10% of all the farmland in England to build solar and wind projects as part of their net zero by 2030 plan there. There's so much impact in terms of the infrastructure itself. You have to understand that when you build a 700-foot tall windmill, these massive towers for the turbines, you're essentially building a skyscraper that requires an enormous foundation. And the industry hides these foundations underground, 3 feet below the ground, in order to conceal them from the public. There are no regulations that are ever going to require those foundations to be dug up and properly disposed of when the projects outlive their useful life. And by the way, their useful life expires a lot sooner than they tell you. They're going to tell you that these turbines have a 20 to 25 year life, when in reality, they're typically replaced within 7 to 10 years after they're installed. And when they do that, when the wind companies do that, they're going to go to your local utility company and demand higher guaranteed rates for the delivery of their power. This is the scam they're running all over the world, in the United States and everywhere else. And so you're going to be left with a choice to either give them those higher rates so that they continue generating sporadic bits of electricity, or just lose your initial investment and have to find generation capacity from another source. That is the reality of the wind industry. And it doesn't conform in any way at all with the narrative that, unfortunately, a lot of local landowners end up being sold when they sign these leases.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. Let's start by talking about the site preparation. You talked about 17 million trees being cut down in Scotland. Is that because they have to create wind channels that allow the wind to come in unabated?
Right. So, it's no different than any other energy project. If you drill an oil well, you have to drill the well where the oil is underground. By the same token, for wind development, you have to site the wind development where the wind blows, at an ideal rate, an ideal percentage of the time. In the United States, the Great Plains of the central part of the country is where the biggest preponderance of our wind installations are, because you just have a pretty steady supply of wind in that area. Same thing with offshore wind. You tend to have pretty strong winds offshore in the Atlantic Ocean, where we're building them in the United States, and in the North Sea, off the coast of England and Scotland. And so when you do them onshore, you need to identify where the wind blows, what's a good location for that. And if it's in the middle of a forest, well, then you have to clear the forest. It's not just in Scotland. Germany has sacrificed a big swath of the Black Forest, one of their supposedly protected areas, in the name of plopping down 150 or so big wind towers. And what we see in Germany is that, their big plans for converting their national grid to wind power has completely failed, and they're burning more coal now than they were 10 years ago. So it's a history. The whole industry is just this pretty much uninterrupted history, litany of failure to keep promises and live up to expectations.
You also talked about the foundation that these skyscraper-sized windmills have to stand on.
Yeah.
What is the site preparation there? This must be environmentally disturbing just in the
Sure.
creation of the foundation.
Yeah. So, you have to first come in and clear the area. Typically, for a 700-foot tall tower, the foundation, you're going to have to clear 4 to 6 acres of land, level it out, just like you do for any, building a home or anything else. Then you dig a big hole to put the foundation in, and you pour concrete and rebar into that hole. It's obviously a lot more complicated than that, but you use massive amounts of concrete and rebar to reinforce the concrete, all of which has a massive greenhouse gas emission profile. The cement industry is one of the highest emitting industries on the face of the earth. And typically, those emissions, when you see studies, saying that if you replace gas with wind, you save X amount of emissions, they don't factor in the emissions from the concrete or the rebar or the transportation of the 450-foot long blades for these wind towers. And it's just all it's just an unending bit of misinformation that is pounded into the public's brain from our news media. And without that, the industry probably couldn't exist, because, people would be fully aware of these impacts and the inability of the industry to keep its promises.
So one of the other elements, of course, is that you're generating this power in a remote location. How do you then deliver that to the grid?
Well, that's maybe the biggest problem of all. because, like I say, you have to site the windmills where the wind blows. And typically the demand centers are in big cities, hundreds of miles away, which means you have to then build a massive transmission project, a project for transmission lines that for which you have to condemn thousands, if not millions, of acres of land to, string the wires down and deliver the electricity to the demand center. And in the process of doing that, by the way, you lose a lot of the power that's generated just through line loss, a pretty significant percentage of it. In Texas, when our legislature invoked its requirement for 10% of wind industry on our power grid back in 2001, the wind industry told us that the transmission lines to bring the power from West Texas to Dallas and Houston markets, which is several hundred miles, would cost $1 billion. 11 years later, the initial project was completed at a total cost of around $8 billion. So that's an 800% understatement in the cost of the project. And it takes that long to just secure the rights of way and condemn the land you have to have for the rights of way for the power lines and get all the permits in place. It's incredibly costly. It's incredibly time consuming. They never meet you're never going to be able to meet these net zero goals that the Canadian government is establishing, net zero by 2030 or 35, whatever it is. They will end up delaying that, by 5 or 10 years, 2 or 3 times before they finally give up. It's just none of what they tell you is what is actually going to happen.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. You talk about the distance the power has to be delivered to reach the grid. It's my understanding that you are then forced to use copper wire.
Oh, sure.
You have no choice. You can't use aluminum wire because the loss of power would make it unsustainable. Does that not then also put a demand on copper that we need for a variety of other green initiatives?
Yeah, copper and an array of critical energy minerals. You're going to have to dramatically increase mining activities for these metals like copper, zinc, nickel, antimony. There's just a long list of them. It's going to require a 300 to 400% increase in open strip mining and mountain mining activities, which, you're never going to be able to do in Canada or the United States. Our country's got out of that business 40 years ago and farmed it all out to China and other developing nations. And so you're ultimately going to be reliant on supply chains for those minerals that are controlled by China, which I think everyone in the free world knows is setting itself up as a potential adversary to the free world. And that doesn't seem to be a sustainable model for the long term. And it's why, in the United States, even the Biden government recognized that and embarked on a big project to try to free our supply chains, to develop supply chains with allied nations so that we're not dependent on China for our energy security. They weren't successful in that, so the Trump administration is going to have to ramp that up. But it's a problem even our Democratic Party in the United States recognizes.
Let's talk about what the towers and the blades are made of and what that process entails, because this is big-time manufacturing.
Oh, it is, yes. I mean, these blades are enormous. I'm sure most people have by now seen them going down the highway. Even for a small wind tower, the blades are roughly about half the length of the height of the tower. A small wind tower is 300 feet tall, so the blade will be 150 feet. And they keep getting bigger and bigger. The problem wind has is it's not a versatile power source. You can't do much with it to generate more power from a turbine other than put it on a taller tower where the wind blows harder and more consistently. So the size of these things is huge. They involve a lot of different substances, a lot of fiberglass, a lot of metals, including rare earth minerals, go into them. And it's a very energy intensive manufacturing process that creates a lot of emissions. Many of them are made in China. Maybe most of them are made in China, where emissions regulations are very lax. And again, this is a part of the development that really doesn't get captured in most of these studies that make these big claims about, how much emissions are being saved by converting other power sources to wind.
Can you also tell me about the generator that's at the, I guess, at the receiving end of the blade? These are massive
Yeah, they're
structures.
huge.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you look at them from a distance and go, okay, it doesn't look that big until you get up close, and they are massive.
yeah, yeah. It's like the gargoyles on top of a skyscraper. The sculptures that are up there. You look at them, they seem tiny, but you go up onto the observation deck and they're enormous. Yeah, the closer you get to them, the more you get a feel for their size. And again, a lot of uh, emissions intensive manufacturing processes goes into making those things. They require a lot of oil and petroleum products to keep them lubricated and in operations. And if you ever get a chance to tour a wind industrial site, a wind farm, if you get up next to the tower, you're going to see on the land a lot of stains from oil products that have leaked while they're being lubricated and fallen to the ground. So these are not, I mean, even with the daily operations of a wind farm, you require a good deal of petroleum projects just to keep them going. And when you have an ice storm and the blades freeze up, typically they get sprayed with antifreeze, the antifreeze you put in your car in order to de-ice the blades. Okay, so so you, these are inconvenient truths that the wind industry doesn't like to talk about, but it's just the reality of what you're going to be facing.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. The other element that I find a bit baffling, because I don't understand why birds can't avoid windmills, but the number of birds that die as a result of these windmill farms is extraordinary.
Yeah.
Do we understand why birds don't seem to get it to stay away?
Well, a big part of well, there's several factors. One is the fact that a bird's eyesight is different than a human's eyesight, and they have a difficult time distinguishing the color of these white blades from the blue sky. And up at that height, of course, you don't have any background trees or anything to differentiate the blade from the sky. So you don't have that contrast available to the birds. And there many of these wind farms are intentionally put down into natural bird migration corridors because birds use those corridors because the wind blows quite a bit. Okay. For example, I mean, one of the most unbelievable things the Biden administration tried to do in the United States was to lease for massive offshore wind developments in the center of the Gulf of Mexico and what they call the migratory bird superhighway in the Gulf of Mexico, or I guess they're calling it the Gulf of America now, which billions of migratory birds representing thousands of different species use that corridor across the Gulf of Mexico every year. And it would have just decimated birds' populations if you put giant wind farms out there. But they were totally intent on doing it. Luckily, the companies were smart enough not to bid on the leases when they were offered for sale, mainly because they didn't want to take on that public relations fiasco. So I don't know. I'm not knowledgeable about migratory bird patterns on these indigenous lands in Canada, but typically, if you're going to put a wind farm where the wind blows, that you're likely to have migratory birds using those corridors. So it's a bad situation.
I have trouble understanding why there seems to be a willingness to say, well, some birds are going to have to die for us to be able to create wind power, as though somehow that's okay. And I say that
Yeah.
because years ago, when I first started this program, I was talking to a fellow who represented an environmental organization that was adamantly opposed to the building of oil pipelines. And I asked about windmills, and he went, it's a price that we have to be willing to pay, the loss of bird life. And I have quite a bit
Yeah.
of trouble with that.
Yeah, I do too. And it's so hypocritical. And the irony, of course, is that many of the same people that are promoters of the wind industry are also claim to be concerned about endangered species. And many of these migratory birds are, of course, endangered species. One of the most incredible stories I saw here a few years ago was a California condor had been killed by a wind farm, and it barely made the news. Almost didn't make any news stories at all. Just a local Los Angeles TV channel reported it. If that California condor had been killed on an oil drilling site, it would have been headline news on every network on television and a front page story in every newspaper in the United States. So there's just this difference in perception, and it's part of the dogma behind what I honestly and truly believe is more of a religious exercise than anything else. That this is all acceptable. It's the acceptable cost for getting rid of too much plant food in the atmosphere. It's an amazing bit of dogma and really even almost brainwashing for people to be willing to say these things with a straight face.
So, final point before we run out of time. I see these graveyards of windmill blades and towers and motors and whatnot
Yeah.
with nowhere for them to be repurposed. This is a
Right.
problem as well, isn't it?
It is, and we have these things popping up all over West Texas and the Texas Panhandle now, because like I say, the blades end up being replaced every 7 to 10 years, not every 25 years, and so you just have this enormous quantity of these giant blades that cities don't want to put in their landfills because they'll fill the landfill up with wind blades. And so they have to, the wind developers, the operators have to buy acreage to put the retired wind blades on, and they just sit out there in the open air and rot. Um, and because they don't want to bear the expense, and they're not required to bear the expense of burying them, right? So again, this is the problem with no real regulatory structure to require the proper retirement and dismantling of these things. So it's just a big problem, and unfortunately, it's all created by bad public policy. It's all created by politicians who want a virtue signal about renewable energy and what they've done to bring all this stuff to your communities, without wanting to also bear the responsibility of what happens years down the road when it's time for those things to be retired and the landowner wakes up and realizes, no, they're not going to be removed or retired. They're going to stand on your property from here to eternity and just be allowed to dilapidate. It's just an awful situation, and I just wish our news media would be more honest about reporting about it.
Well, on the surface, you can't help but go, yeah, wind. Let's use the wind to generate power. That sounds good. It sounds environmentally friendly, and it fits with objectives to reduce the consumption of fossil fuels. But thank you for taking time to shed light on what the reality of windmills is. Appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed the discussion.